On my third night at the remote radar base in Alaska, I watched something on our screens that made my blood run cold. 12 unidentified objects, moving at speeds that defied physics, suddenly stopped mid-air and formed a perfect circle around our facility. My commanding officer's hand was shaking as he reached for the red phone. What we saw next would be classified for the next 40 years, until now.
Let me start by saying this. I never believed in any of this stuff. UFOs, aliens, government conspiracies, all of it seemed like stories people told to feel special, to pretend they knew something the rest of the world didn't. I was a skeptic. A rational guy who believed in what I could see, touch, and measure. That's probably why the military liked me. They needed people who followed protocols, who didn't let their imagination run wild when they stared at a radar screen for 12 hours straight. My name is Marcus, and in 1983, I was 23 years old, fresh out of technical training, and absolutely certain I had my whole life figured out. I joined the Air Force because my father had served and his father before him. It felt like the right path, structured, honorable, predictable. I was good with electronics, great with computers, and I could stay calm under pressure. Those skills landed me a position as a radar technician, which honestly sounded pretty boring. I figured I'd spend a couple years tracking weather patterns in commercial aircraft, get my benefits, and move on to a comfortable civilian job. Then I got my orders. Station North, they called it. Never anything more specific than that. The paperwork listed it as a remote radar installation in Alaska, part of the early warning system designed to detect Soviet aircraft during the Cold War. When I looked it up on a map, I found nothing. The coordinates they gave us pointed to a blank space in the Alaskan interior, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by wilderness that could kill you in a dozen different ways. I remember calling my mom before I left. She cried, which was not like her. My mother was strong, practical, the kind of woman who could fix a car engine and bake a perfect pie on the same afternoon. But when I told her I was going to Alaska, to some place I couldn't even name, her voice cracked. Just promise me you'll be careful, and pray every single day, Marcus. Promise me. I promised, even though I wasn't much for prayer back then. I figured she was just being a worried mother, concerned about the cold and the isolation. I had no idea what she was really afraid of. The flight to Alaska took forever. Multiple connections, each plane smaller than the last, until finally I was in a tiny prop aircraft with 5 other servicemen, all of us heading to Station North. Nobody talked much. We were all young, all trying to look tougher than we felt, all wondering what we'd gotten ourselves into. When we finally landed, it wasn't at an airport. It was a rough airstrip carved into the frozen ground, surrounded by endless white. The cold hit me the moment the door opened. Not just cold, but a piercing, aggressive cold that seemed to go straight through your clothes and into your bones. The sun was setting, even though it was only 3 in the afternoon, painting the sky in shades of purple and deep blue that I'd never seen before. A man in a heavy parka was waiting for us, his face barely visible behind a fur-lined hood. He didn't introduce himself, just gestured for us to follow him to a tracked vehicle that looked like it had been built during World War II. We climbed in, and as we drove across the frozen landscape, I got my first look at Station North. It wasn't impressive. A cluster of squat, reinforced buildings, half buried in snow, connected by covered walkways. A few antenna arrays rising like skeletal fingers against the darkening sky. Everything painted in military gray and white, designed to blend into the environment. The whole place looked temporary, like it could be abandoned tomorrow and the wilderness would swallow it within a week. But it was the isolation that hit me hardest. In every direction, as far as I could see, there was nothing. No roads, no towns, no signs of human life except our little cluster of buildings. We were completely alone out here, cut off from the rest of the world in a way that felt almost primordial. The man in the parka finally spoke as we pulled up to the main building. His voice was rough, weathered. "Welcome to Station North. I'm Sergeant Holloway. I run operations here. First rule, what you see here, what you hear here, stays here, forever. We clear?" We all nodded, though I didn't really understand what he meant. What could possibly happen at a radar station that required that kind of secrecy? I was about to find out.
Inside, Station North was warmer, but not much more welcoming. The walls were concrete, painted that same institutional gray, and the fluorescent lights hummed constantly, creating a low buzz that you could feel in your teeth. Sergeant Holloway led us through a maze of corridors, past closed doors with keypads and warning signs, until we reached a briefing room. There were about 15 other people already stationed there, and they all had the same look. Tired eyes, pale skin from lack of sunlight, and something else I couldn't quite identify. A kind of wariness, like they were constantly waiting for something to happen. They barely glanced at us as we filed in. Holloway stood at the front of the room, arms crossed. He was probably in his 40s, with gray streaking through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that suggested he'd seen things that aged him faster than time alone could manage. When he spoke, everyone listened. "You've all been assigned here because you're good at your jobs and you can keep your mouths shut. Station North is officially part of the North American Aerospace Defense Command Early Warning System. We track aircraft, monitor for potential Soviet incursions, and maintain constant surveillance of our airspace. That's what your families think you do. That's what you'll tell anyone who asks." He paused, letting that sink in. The way he emphasized "officially" made my stomach tighten. "Unofficially," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "we track other things. Objects that don't fit normal flight patterns. Objects that move in ways that shouldn't be possible. You're going to see things on those radar screens that will challenge everything you think you know about aviation, about physics, about reality itself. Your job is simple. Track them, record them, and report them. Nothing more. You don't speculate, you don't theorize, you definitely don't talk about it. Not to each other, not to anyone. Understood?" My hand shut up before I could stop myself. "Sir, what kind of objects are we talking about?" Holloway's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought I saw something like pity cross his face. "You'll see for yourself, soon enough. Next question?" Nobody else raised their hand. The room had gone very quiet. After the briefing, we were assigned to our quarters, small rooms with metal bunk beds, a locker, and nothing else. My roommate was a guy named Chen, a radar operator from California who'd been at Station North for 3 months already. He was thin, almost gaunt, and had developed a habit of constantly checking over his shoulder when he talked. "You seem nervous," I said, trying to break the ice as I unpacked my gear. Chen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, well, you will be too after tonight. First shift is always the hardest. Everything they don't tell you in the briefing, you learn real fast in the control room." "What do you mean? What don't they tell us?" He sat down on his bunk, rubbing his face with both hands. "Look, man, I can't explain it. I know that sounds crazy, but you literally have to see it to understand. Just keep your cool, okay? Whatever happens, don't freak out. Holloway hates it when new guys freak out."
Has that happened? People freaking out? Last guy lasted 2 days before he requested an immediate transfer. They sent him somewhere else, but not before he had to sign about 50 different non-disclosure agreements. I heard he still has nightmares. I wanted to press him for more information, but something in his expression told me he'd said all he was going to say. Instead, I finished unpacking in silence, my mind racing with possibilities. What could possibly be so disturbing about looking at a radar screen? My first shift started at 2200 hours, 10 p.m. The control room was located in the center of the facility, accessible only through 2 sets of locked doors that required both a keypad code and a card key. The security seemed excessive for a simple radar station, but I was starting to understand that nothing about Station North was simple. The room itself was dimly lit, illuminated primarily by the glow of multiple radar screens and computer monitors. There were 6 stations, each manned by a 2-person team. The air smelled of coffee, electronics, and something else. Fear, maybe, though I told myself I was being ridiculous. Chen led me to our station in the back corner. "This is ours," he said, gesturing to 2 chairs facing a large circular radar display. "We monitor Sector 7, which covers about 200 miles of airspace to the northwest. That screen shows altitude, speed, and heading. This one," he pointed to a smaller monitor, "shows enhanced tracking data. If something weird happens, we log it here." He indicated a leather-bound notebook, the kind you might use for a journal, which seemed strangely old-fashioned given all the technology around us. "Why a physical log? Why not digital?" "Digital records can be hacked, leaked, or subpoenaed," came a voice from behind us. I turned to see a woman, maybe 30 years old, with sharp features and serious eyes. She wore the same uniform as the rest of us, but she carried herself with an authority that suggested she'd been doing this a long time. "I'm Captain Morrison. I oversee operations in this room. Handwritten logs stay here, and only here. They're destroyed after they're transcribed and classified. You following?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Chen will show you the basics. Remember, we record what we see exactly as we see it. No embellishment, no interpretation. Facts only." She moved on to check the other stations, her boots barely making a sound on the floor. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Commercial flights appeared as expected, following their designated routes. A few military aircraft crossed our sector, their transponders identifying them immediately. Chan walked me through the different radar signatures, showing me how to distinguish between various aircraft types based on their speed, altitude, and flight characteristics. "See that?" He pointed to a blip on the screen. "That's a C-130, probably a transport flight. Moves steady, predictable altitude, follows standard navigation routes, easy to identify." I nodded, starting to relax. This wasn't so different from my training. Maybe everyone had been exaggerating. Maybe the weird stuff Chen mentioned was just unusual weather patterns or equipment malfunctions. Then, at exactly 23:47 hours, everything changed. A blip appeared on our screen, not entering from the edge like normal aircraft do, but simply materializing in the middle of our sector. 1 second it wasn't there, the next second it was. "Contact," Chen said immediately, his voice tight. "Sector 7, bearing 270, altitude..." Wait, that can't be right. I leaned forward, checking the readings. The object was showing an altitude of 75,000 feet and climbing fast. "What's the speed?" I asked. Chen's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up enhanced data. When the number appeared on the screen, we both stared at it in silence. 3,000 miles per hour and accelerating. "That's impossible," I whispered. My eyes locked on the screen. No aircraft in 1983 could move that fast, not even the SR-71 Blackbird, which was the fastest thing we had. And this object wasn't just fast, it was accelerating in ways that should have torn any physical craft apart. "Log it," Chen said, his voice steady, despite the tension I could see in his shoulders. He'd been through this before. I grabbed the leather notebook with shaking hands and started writing. Time, 23:47 hours. Sector 7, single unknown contact. Initial altitude, 75,000 feet. Speed, 3,000 plus miles per hour and increasing. No transponder signal, no corresponding flight plan. As I wrote, the object climbed higher, 80,000 feet, 90,000. The speed reading kept changing, 3,500 miles per hour, 4,000 miles per hour, 4,500 miles per hour. My training told me this was a malfunction, a glitch in the system. But Chen's reaction, the way he calmly tracked it, like this was just another Tuesday, told me otherwise. "It's going to stop," Chen said quietly. "They always stop." "What do you mean, they always—" The object stopped, instantly. No deceleration, no gradual slowdown. One moment it was moving at over 5,000 miles per hour. The next moment it was completely stationary at 95,000 feet. I felt my mouth go dry. That's not possible. The G-forces alone would liquefy any pilot, yeah. That's why we know they're not ours, not Russian either. These things, whatever they are, they don't follow the rules. I stared at the screen, watching the blip hover in one spot. My rational mind was screaming at me that this had to be an error, but the radar was functioning perfectly. All diagnostics were green. This was real. "How long does it usually—" I started to ask, but the object moved again. This time it didn't accelerate, it simply jumped. In one instant it was at that position, and the next instant it was 40 miles away. No travel time between the 2 points. It just moved. "Jesus," I breathed. "Log it," Chen reminded me. "Everything you see." I wrote faster, my handwriting getting messier. Object displayed instantaneous position change. No visible travel path between points. Now hovering at— "Chen, we've got more." This came from another operator across the room, a guy with red hair whose name I hadn't learned yet. "3 contacts, Sector 4, same profile." Captain Morrison appeared beside our station, so quietly I almost jumped. "How many total?" she asked. "4 confirmed. Sector 7 has 1, Sector 4 has 3. Altitude and speed?" "All hovering now, ma'am, between 90,000 and 100,000 feet. They moved fast to get there, but now they're just waiting." Morrison's jaw tightened. She pulled out a radio. "Holloway, we have multiple unknowns. Pattern Delta." The radio crackled. "Acknowledged. Maintain observation. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt any communication or tracking beyond standard protocols." "Understood." Morrison turned back to us. "Nobody touches anything except the standard equipment. No active radar pings, no radio broadcasts. We watch, we record. That's all." I wanted to ask why, wanted to understand what was happening, but something about Morrison's expression made me swallow my questions. This was clearly a situation they'd dealt with before, and there were protocols in place. Protocols that apparently involved doing absolutely nothing except observe. For the next 20 minutes, the 4 objects remained stationary. I kept waiting for them to move again, to do something, but they just hovered there, invisible to the naked eye but bright as day on our screens. Other operators were logging their own observations, the scratch of pens on paper, the only sound besides the hum of electronics. Then Chen grabbed my arm. "Look!" On the screen, all 4 objects began moving simultaneously. Not randomly, they moved in perfect coordination, forming a straight line across different sectors, spacing themselves exactly 20 miles apart. The precision was incredible, like watching a military formation, except no human pilots could coordinate with that level of accuracy without radio communication, and we weren't detecting any signals. "They're organizing," I said, stating the obvious because I didn't know what else to say. "They do this sometimes," Chen replied. "Form patterns, geometric shapes mostly, triangles, squares, circles. Nobody knows why." As if responding to his words, the four objects began to move again, this time tracing a perfect square in the sky, each one taking a corner position. They moved in absolute synchronicity, their speeds matching exactly, their turns impossibly sharp. I thought about my mother, about her asking me to pray. For the first time since I had arrived, I understood why she'd been so worried. This wasn't just a remote radar station. This was a front row seat to something that shouldn't exist, something that challenged every assumption about what was possible. "How often does this happen?" I asked Chen quietly. "Every night," he said. "Sometimes just one or two, sometimes dozens. They show up, they move around, they leave. We've been tracking them for years." "Years? And nobody knows? I mean, outside of here?" Chen gave me a look that was both pitying and knowing. "People know, the people who need to know. But it's not the kind of thing you can just announce to the world, is it? Hey everyone, we're not alone, and these things are flying around up there every single night, doing things that break the laws of physics. How do you think people would react?" I didn't have an answer for that. The objects maintained their square formation for another 10 minutes. Then, one by one, they accelerated and vanished from our screens. Not flying away, vanishing. One moment they were there, the next moment they were gone. No travel path between them, no gradual fade. Just gone. The control room seemed to exhale collectively. Morrison made her rounds, checking each station's logs, making sure everything was documented properly. When she got to us, she read over my entries carefully. "Good detail. Clear, factual, no speculation. That's exactly what we need." She paused, studying my face. "I know this is a lot to process on your first night. It gets easier." "Does it?" I asked before I could stop myself. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "No, not really, but you get used to pretending it does." She moved on to the next station. Chen and I sat in silence for a while, watching the empty screen. Normal air traffic resumed, a commercial flight here, a cargo plane there, all moving at normal speeds, following normal routes. It felt surreal, like the previous hour had been a dream. "Does anyone ever figure out what they are, or what they want?" I asked finally. "That's above our pay grade, man, way above. We just watch and record. Somewhere, someone's probably analyzing all this data, trying to make sense of it. But us, we're just the eyes. We're not supposed to think about it too much." But how could I not think about it? In one night, my entire worldview had been shattered. We weren't alone. Something was up there, something intelligent and technological and completely beyond our understanding. And apparently this had been happening for years, tracked and recorded and kept secret from the entire world. The rest of the shift passed without incident. When 0600 hours finally came and our relief arrived, I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything I had seen. I couldn't sleep. That's the thing they don't tell you about witnessing something that fundamentally breaks your understanding of reality. Your brain just won't shut off. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from that shift. The numbers, the impossible movements, the perfect geometric formations. Chen was snoring softly in the bunk across from me, apparently unbothered by what we'd witnessed. But he'd had 3 months to process this. For me, it was all still raw and overwhelming. Around noon, I gave up on sleep and headed to the mess hall. The facility ran on a weird schedule since we had to maintain 24-hour operations. Some people were eating breakfast, others were having dinner, and time became this fluid, meaningless thing when the sun barely rose in winter and barely set in summer. I grabbed a tray of something that might have been eggs and sat down at an empty table. I was picking at the food, not really tasting it, when someone sat down across from me. First night's always the hardest. I looked up to see a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup. His uniform identified him as a master sergeant, but his name tag just said Richards. "Does it show?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "You've got the look. Everyone gets it after their first contact. That 1,000-yard stare, like you're seeing through everything instead of at it." He took a sip of his coffee. "I had my first contact in 1971, 12 years ago, and I still remember every second of it." "You've been doing this for 12 years?" "Off and on. I've been stationed here 3 separate times. They keep pulling me back because apparently I'm good at not losing my mind." He set down his cup. "You want to talk about it? What you saw?" I glanced around the mess hall. There were maybe a dozen other people scattered around, all maintaining their own conversations or eating in silence. "Are we allowed to talk about it, I mean?" "With each other, in here? Yeah. This whole facility is secure. It's when you leave, when you're out there in the normal world, that you keep your mouth shut." He leaned back in his chair. "So what'd you see? Single contact? Multiple?" "4, I said. "They formed a square. Perfect coordination, impossible movements, and then they just disappeared." Chen nodded, like I just described a routine weather pattern. "Geometric formations are common. We've seen triangles, pentagons, circles, even a hexagram once. Whatever they are, they like patterns. But what are they? I mean, what's the official theory?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "There is no official theory, son. Or rather, there are too many official theories, depending on who you ask. Some think they're experimental Soviet aircraft. Some think they're ours, black projects so secret that even we don't know about them. Some think they're atmospheric phenomena we don't understand yet. And some," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "some think they're exactly what they look like, not from here." "Aliens?" I said the word quietly, feeling ridiculous even as I said it. "Extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers, pick your poison. The point is, nobody really knows, and nobody's in a hurry to find out, because the moment we admit we don't control our own airspace, the moment we admit there's something up there that's more advanced than us, everything changes. The military, governments, the whole power structure, it all gets called into question." I thought about that, about the implications. So we just watch them? Forever? We collect data, hundreds of reports, thousands of sightings, all carefully documented and filed away. Maybe someday someone will figure out what to do with all that information. Or maybe it'll just sit in a warehouse somewhere until we're all dead. In the meantime, we do our jobs, we keep the secret, and we try not to let it drive us crazy. How do you deal with it, knowing something this big and not being able to tell anyone? Richards was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "You find ways. Prayer helps some people. Others drink, though I don't recommend that path. Some folks keep journals, even though they're not supposed to. Me? I figure I'm part of something important, even if I don't understand what it is. We're witnesses to something incredible. That has to count for something." Over the next few weeks, I fell into a routine. Sleep during the day, work during the night, and try not to think too hard about what I was seeing. Because Richards had been right about one thing. It happened every night. Not always in my sector, not always multiple contacts, but somewhere on those screens, something impossible was happening. I started to recognize patterns. The objects appeared most frequently between 2300 and 400 hours. They favored certain altitudes, usually between 80,000 and 120,000 feet. They almost never descended below 50,000 feet, at least not where we could track them. And they responded to things. When we had military exercises in the area, we'd see more activity. When there were nuclear-capable bombers in the air, the contacts would increase dramatically. That last part bothered me the most. It suggested intelligence, awareness. They weren't just random phenomena. They were paying attention to us. Chen and I became a good team. He taught me the subtle differences between types of contacts. Some moved erratically, others followed precise geometric patterns. Some seemed curious and would pace our aircraft, while others avoided any proximity to human technology. We developed our own shorthand for logging them. Type A for the fast movers, Type B for the hovering objects, Type C for the ones that seemed to teleport. But it was during my 6th week at Station North that things escalated in a way I wasn't prepared for. It started normally enough. Our shift began at 2200 hours, and for the first hour we tracked routine air traffic. Then, at 2314 hours, we got our first contact, a Type A, moving fast from the northwest. I logged it, Chen tracked it, and we watched it perform its usual impossible maneuvers. Then another appeared, and another. Within 15 minutes, we had 8 contacts in our sector alone, and reports were coming in from every other station. By 2345 hours, we were tracking over 30 objects. "This is unusual," Chen said, which was an understatement. I'd never seen more than half a dozen at once. Captain Morrison was moving between stations, her face tense. "Keep tracking, keep logging, don't miss anything." The objects began organizing themselves, forming a pattern I'd never seen before. Not a geometric shape, but lines. Long, parallel lines stretching across multiple sectors, like they were creating a grid. They maintained perfect spacing, each one exactly 3 miles from its neighbors. "They're doing a search pattern," someone said from across the room, "like they're looking for something." The temperature in the control room seemed to drop. Everyone felt it. This was different. This wasn't observation or curiosity. This was purposeful, systematic. Then Holloway's voice crackled over the intercom. "All stations, we have confirmation of an anomaly at ground level, Sector 9. Visual observation team reports strange lights approximately 2 miles from the facility. Enhanced security protocols in effect. Nobody goes outside." My heart started pounding. They were here, not just up in the unreachable sky, but down here, close to us. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt actual fear. The objects in the sky maintained their grid pattern for another 20 minutes. Then one by one, they began to descend. Not toward us, but to Sector 9, where the ground team had seen the lights. The control room had gone absolutely silent, except for the steady beep of the radar and the scratch of pens on paper. Everyone was logging furiously, trying to capture every detail as we watched 30-plus objects descend in perfect formation toward a point just 2 miles from our facility. "Altitude dropping," Chen reported, his voice barely above a whisper. 70,000 feet, 60,000, they're maintaining formation. Captain Morrison was on the radio with Holloway, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. "Sir, all contacts descending toward Sector 9, current altitude 50,000 and dropping. Request guidance." Whatever Holloway said back made her face go pale. She turned to address the room. "Listen up. We continue standard observation only. No active radar, no communications attempts. Whatever happens, we are observers, nothing more. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, ma'am" rippled through the room, but I could hear the fear in everyone's voices. This wasn't like the distant, abstract contacts we'd been tracking. This felt personal, immediate. The objects descended to 40,000 feet, then 30,000. At 20,000 feet, they stopped, all at once, holding their grid pattern for exactly 3 minutes. I watched the clock, counting every second, and then they simply vanished. Not flying away, not ascending, just gone. All 30 of them in the same instant. All contacts lost, Chen reported. No travel path, no fade, just gone. Morrison grabbed the radio again. Holloway, all contacts have disappeared from radar. Last position was Sector 9, 20,000 feet. Ground team status. The radio crackled with static for a long moment before Holloway's voice came through, tight with tension. Ground team they're okay. Shaken, but okay. They report the lights have disappeared. All teams maintain position. Control room continue standard operations. But how could we continue as if nothing had happened? I looked around the room and saw my own shock reflected in every face. Whatever had just occurred was unprecedented, at least in my brief experience here. The objects had never come that close, never descended in formation like that, never demonstrated such obvious coordination and purpose. The rest of the shift crawled by. Normal air traffic resumed, but none of us could focus on it properly. We were all waiting for something else to happen, for those contacts to reappear, but they didn't. By the time our relief arrived at 0600 hours, I felt like I'd aged a year in one night. Chen and I walked back to our quarters in silence. The facility felt different now, less like a safe observation post and more like a target. When we passed a window, I found myself looking out into the early morning darkness, half expecting to see strange lights hovering over the snow. "Get some sleep," Chen said, when we reached our room. "Try not to think about it." "Yeah," I said, but we both knew that was impossible. I lay in my bunk for an hour, my mind racing, before I gave up and decided to take a walk. The facility wasn't large, but there were a few common areas: a small gym, a library with outdated paperbacks, and a recreation room with a television that only picked up one channel on good days. I headed for the library, thinking maybe I could read something mindless to distract myself. That's where I met Sarah. She was sitting in one of the worn armchairs, a book open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was staring at the wall with that same 1,000-yard stare Richards had described. When I entered, she glanced up, and I saw red-rimmed eyes that suggested she'd been crying. "Sorry," I said immediately, starting to back out. "No, it's okay." Her voice was soft, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. "I wasn't really reading anyway, just trying to process." I hesitated, then sat down in the chair across from her. "You were on shift last night too?" She nodded. "Communication station. We monitor all the radio frequencies, civilian and military. When those things descended, we were listening to the ground team's transmissions. What they saw?" She trailed off, shaking her head. "What did they see?" I asked, leaning forward. Sarah looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust me. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The team leader, Martinez, he's not someone who scares easily. I've worked with him for months, but last night, his voice on the radio, I've never heard anyone sound like that. Pure terror." "What did he say?" "He said there were 3 lights hovering about 50 feet off the ground, not like aircraft lights, not like anything familiar. He described them as spheres of brilliant white light, so bright they hurt to look at. But they didn't illuminate the ground beneath them, like the light just stopped instead of spreading the way light should." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What else?" "They were silent, completely silent. And Martinez said he felt something when he looked at them, not just fear, but a presence, like something was looking back at him, studying him.
He said it felt like standing in front of something ancient and incomprehensibly intelligent, and knowing that you were nothing more than an ant to it. Sarah's hands were shaking as she spoke. Then the spheres began to move, circling the observation post. Martinez reported feeling a vibration, not in the air, but in his bones, like a frequency that bypassed his ears and went straight into his body. 2 of his team members collapsed. They're in the medical bay now, unconscious. Nobody knows what's wrong with them. They're unconscious? Why didn't anyone tell us? Holloway's keeping it quiet, doesn't want panic, but everyone in communications heard it happen. We heard Martinez screaming for a medic, heard the fear in his voice as he described his people just dropping to the ground. She wiped at her eyes. This job, this place, I thought I could handle it. I thought watching them on screens was manageable because they were far away, abstract. But last night they came close, and people got hurt, and I realized we're not safe here. We're not observers, we're potential targets. I didn't know what to say to that. She was right, of course. We'd all been operating under the assumption that we were somehow protected, that these objects weren't interested in us specifically. Last night had shattered that illusion. "I'm Marcus," I said, finally, feeling like I should at least introduce myself properly. "Sarah." She managed a weak smile. "I'd say it's nice to meet you, but given the circumstances..." "Yeah," I returned the smile. "How long have you been here?" 4 months. Long enough to see a lot of strange things, but nothing like last night. Usually they stay up high, they move around, they leave. This felt different, aggressive almost. We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our own thoughts. Then Sarah asked, "Do you believe in God, Marcus?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I was raised to, but I haven't thought about it much in recent years. Why? Because I pray every night now. I pray that whatever these things are, they're not hostile. I pray that we're just an interesting curiosity to them, not a threat or a resource to be exploited. And I pray that if things go wrong, it'll be quick. She laughed, but it was a hollow sound. My grandmother would be proud. She always said fear would bring me back to faith. My mother asked me to pray too before I came here. She was worried, more worried than I understood at the time. Mothers know. Somehow they always know. We talked for another hour, sharing stories about our families, our lives before Station North, carefully avoiding the topic of what we'd witnessed. It felt good to connect with someone, to remember that we were still human, despite being surrounded by the inexplicable.
Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and I formed an unlikely friendship. We'd meet in the library during our off hours, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. She helped me maintain my sanity in a place where sanity felt like a luxury. The facility had a way of isolating you, making you feel disconnected from the normal world. But talking to Sarah reminded me that I wasn't alone in this strange experience. The 2 team members who had collapsed during the close encounter remained unconscious in the medical bay. Official word was that they'd suffered from environmental exposure, but everyone knew that was nonsense. The medical staff ran every test they could think of, CT scans, blood work, neurological exams, but found nothing wrong. The men were simply gone. Their bodies breathed, their hearts beat, but there was nobody home. It was like their consciousness had been switched off. I heard one of the nurses talking, Sarah told me one afternoon as we sat in the library. She said their brain activity is normal, like they're sleeping, but they won't wake up. They've tried everything. How is that possible? I asked, though I was starting to realize that possible had lost all meaning at Station North. I don't know, but it scares me, Marcus. What if that's what happens when you get too close to them? What if they can just turn you off? I didn't have an answer for that. None of us did. The objects continued to appear nightly, but they stayed high after that incident. It was like they'd made their point.
We're here, we're real, and we can reach you if we want to. The message was received. Morale at the station hit an all-time low. People moved through the corridors like ghosts, speaking in whispers, jumping at shadows. Then came the night that changed everything for me. It was my 11th week at Station North, and I was working the late shift with Chen as usual. The night had started quietly, a few routine contacts, all type A's, all maintaining their distance. I was actually starting to relax, thinking maybe we'd get through a shift without incident. At 01:47 hours, everything changed. "Contact," Chen said, his voice sharp. "Sector 7, but this one's different." I looked at the screen and felt my blood run cold. The radar signature was massive, easily 3 times the size of anything we'd tracked before, and it was low, only 30,000 feet, which was unprecedented. "Altitude?" I asked, though I could see it myself. 30,000 feet and descending. "Speed?" "Marcus, it's not moving. It just appeared there." I grabbed the logbook and started writing, but my hands were shaking. Massive contact, Sector 7, appeared without travel path, 30,000 feet. "Captain Morrison was at our station in seconds. Confirm contact." "Confirmed," Chen said. "Large object, stationary, 30,000 feet. It's sitting there." Morrison's face went white. She grabbed her radio. "Holloway, we have a code red situation. Large unknown contact, Sector 7, 30,000 feet, directly above our position." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Directly above our position. Whatever this thing was, it was right on top of us. Holloway's voice came through the radio, tight with controlled panic. "All personnel to code red stations. Activate all recording equipment. Control room, I need constant updates." The facility's alarm began to sound, not the loud, blaring kind, but a low, pulsing tone that was somehow worse. It meant everyone needed to get to designated safe areas immediately. But the control room staff stayed at our posts. Our job was to watch, to record, no matter what. "It's descending," Chen reported. 25,000 feet, 20,000. I looked at the radar screen and saw something that made my stomach drop. Around the large central object, smaller contacts were appearing, dozens of them, forming a protective circle around the larger signature. "Multiple additional contacts," Chan called out. "Small objects forming a perimeter around the primary target." "How many?" demanded Morrison. "Counting 27. No, 26, still more appearing." The objects formed a perfect sphere around the larger central mass, like an escort formation or a protective detail. They descended in perfect synchronization with the large object, maintaining their exact positions relative to it. 15,000 feet, 10,000, 5,000. "It's going below our minimum tracking altitude." Its voice was remarkably steady, but I could see sweat beading on his forehead. "Last reading was 3,000 feet and descending. We're losing it." The radar could only track so low before ground clutter interfered with the signal. As the object descended below 3,000 feet, it started to fade from our screens, the signature breaking up and distorting. "Contact lost on radar. Last known position was approximately 2,000 feet, directly above the facility." Captain Morrison grabbed the facility-wide intercom. "All personnel, massive object has descended below radar coverage. Visual observation teams report." A voice crackled through the speaker. Martinez, the same team leader who'd witnessed the close encounter 2 weeks ago. "Captain, I have visual on... Sweet merciful God, it's huge. It's directly above us, maybe 1,500 feet up. It's blocking out the sky." "Describe it," Morrison ordered, her voice cutting through the fear. It's circular, I think. Maybe disc-shaped. Hard to tell because it's so dark, but there are lights on the underside. Dozens of them, arranged in concentric circles, all pulsing in sequence. The light is blue-white, and it's making the snow glow. Captain, this thing is enormous. It has to be at least 300 feet in diameter." 300 feet. I tried to picture something that size hovering just above our facility, and my imagination failed me. That was nearly the length of a football field. "The smaller objects?" Morrison asked. "They're still with it,
circling around the perimeter. They look like spheres, similar to what we saw before, but there are so many of them. They're moving in a pattern, like they're patrolling. And Captain, Martinez's voice dropped. I can feel it again. That presence. It's stronger this time. It feels like the whole facility is being examined. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. In the control room, everyone had stopped moving, stopped talking. We were all frozen, waiting for whatever came next. Then the lights went out. Not just in the control room, but everywhere. The entire facility plunged into absolute darkness. Emergency backup power should have kicked in immediately, but it didn't. For 10 seconds, I counted them. We sat in complete blackness, the only sound our own breathing and the panicked beating of my heart. When the lights came back on, they flickered weakly, like the power was struggling. The radar screens rebooted, showing nothing but static. All our instruments had been reset. Morrison's voice was tight as she spoke into the radio. Martinez, status report. Silence. Martinez, respond. More silence. Then finally, a crackle of static and Martinez's voice, but it sounded different, shaken, traumatized. They're leaving. The object is ascending, and the smaller ones are following it. They're just leaving. I looked at the radar screen as it came back online. Sure enough, we started picking up contacts again. The large object and its escorts climbing rapidly. Within 2 minutes, they were back above 50,000 feet. Within 5 minutes, they were gone completely, vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared. The control room erupted in nervous chatter, everyone talking at once, but I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could think about was those 10 seconds of absolute darkness and the feeling I'd had during them. The certainty that something vast and incomprehensible was looking down at us, studying us, like we were insects under a microscope.
The facility was placed on lockdown after the incident. Nobody in, nobody out, and everyone was required to undergo a medical evaluation. The doctors checked our vitals, asked us a series of standard questions about our mental state, and cleared us one by one. But I could see the worry in their eyes. They were looking for signs of whatever had happened to the 2 team members who still lay unconscious in the medical bay. Holloway called an emergency meeting in the briefing room the next morning. Every person stationed at North was required to attend. We filed in silently, taking our seats, and I noticed that many people looked like they hadn't slept. Sarah sat next to me, her face drawn and pale. Holloway stood at the front of the room, his usual composed demeanor cracked around the edges. He looked older somehow, worn down by the weight of whatever knowledge he carried. Last night's incident was unprecedented, he began without preamble. In the 15 years this facility has been operating, we have never had a contact descend that low or remain that close for that long. Command is taking this very seriously, and they've authorized me to share information with you that has previously been classified above your clearance levels. A murmur rippled through the room. This was unexpected. Holloway pulled down a projection screen and clicked a remote. An image appeared, a black and white photograph of a radar screen, similar to ours but older, dated 1952. It showed multiple contacts clustered together in an impossible formation. This is from Washington, D.C., July 1952. Multiple objects appeared on radar screens at Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base. They were visible for hours, witnessed by dozens of air traffic controllers, tracked on multiple independent radar systems. F-94 Starfire jets were scrambled to intercept. The pilots reported seeing the objects, described them as bright lights that could outmaneuver anything we had. When the jets approached, the objects would disappear. When the jets left, the objects would return. He clicked to the next image,
Another radar screen, dated 1976. This is from Tehran, Iran. An F-4 Phantom jet attempted to intercept an object. When the pilot armed his weapons, his entire weapons control panel went dead. When he turned away, his systems came back online. He reported feeling like the object was toying with him, demonstrating its superiority. Another click. More images, more dates, more locations. I recognized some of them from history. Incidents that had been reported in newspapers and then explained away as weather balloons, temperature inversions, mass hallucinations. What you're seeing here, Holloway continued, is a small sample of documented encounters spanning 30 years. There are hundreds more from military bases, commercial pilots, naval vessels. The pattern is consistent. Objects displaying technology far beyond our capabilities, showing intelligence and purpose, and demonstrating a particular interest in our military installations and nuclear capabilities. He paused, letting that sink in. We exist because someone high up in the chain of command decided we needed to stop reacting to these incidents and start systematically observing them. We're one of 7 facilities scattered across remote locations, all doing the same thing, watching, recording, trying to understand. Sarah raised her hand. Sir, do we know what they want? Why they're here? Holloway's expression was grim. No, we have theories of no concrete answers. What we do know is this: they've never shown overtly hostile intent. They don't attack, they don't invade, but they also make it very clear that they could if they wanted to. Last night was a demonstration of that. They shut down our power, all of it, including systems that should have been impossible to affect simultaneously. They did it effortlessly, and then they let us turn it back on. It was a message. What message? Someone asked from the back of the room. That we're not in control. That our technology, our weapons, our defenses, they're all irrelevant if these objects decide to do something. We exist at their sufferance. That's the real secret we're keeping here. Not just that these objects exist, but that we're powerless against them. That's not information any government wants its people to know. He clicked to a final image, a document with heavy redactions, but I could make out enough to see it was a classified memo from the Department of Defense. There's a protocol, Holloway said quietly. In the event of a sustained, obvious presence, if these objects ever decide to reveal themselves publicly, there's a plan in place. How to manage the information, how to prevent panic, how to maintain social order. But it's just a plan. Nobody really knows what would happen if the truth came out. He turned off the projector and faced us directly. You're all here because you've proven you can handle this knowledge without breaking. You follow protocols, you maintain security, and you don't let the enormity of it paralyze you. What happened last night was extraordinary, but our mission remains the same. We observe, we record, and we report. That's all we can do. The meeting ended, but nobody moved immediately. We all sat there, processing what we'd just learned. The scope of it was staggering, not just our small station, but a global phenomenon that had been ongoing for decades, carefully monitored and meticulously hidden. As people filed out, I found myself sitting next to Richards, the master sergeant who'd talked to me during my first week. You knew all this already, didn't you? He nodded slowly. Yeah, most of it, yeah. You get briefed on the history when you've been here long enough, or when something happens that forces command to expand the circle of knowledge. Last night qualified. The 2 men in medical, the ones who collapsed during the first close encounter. Are they going to wake up? Richards was quiet for a long moment. "There have been other cases. Not many, but a few. People who got too close, who experienced something we don't understand. Some woke up after a few days, some took weeks, and some—" He trailed off, but I understood what he wasn't saying. "Some never woke up." Yeah. I thought about that, about the risk we were all taking just by being here. Why do you keep coming back? You've done your time. You could request a transfer anywhere else. Why stay? Richard smiled sadly. Because somebody has to bear witness, Marcus. Somebody has to know and remember and record. If everyone who learned about this just walked away, pretended it wasn't happening, what would that say about us as a species? That we're cowards? That we bury our heads in the sand when confronted with something bigger than ourselves? But we're not doing anything. We're just watching. For now. But we're building a record, a database of information. Maybe one day someone will figure out how to use that information, how to communicate, or understand, or defend ourselves if it comes to that. We're the foundation for whatever comes next. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that what we were doing mattered. But sitting in that briefing room, knowing that we were essentially helpless, made me feel small in a way I'd never experienced before. Sarah found me later in the mess hall. I was staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold, lost in my thoughts. "Hell of a briefing," she said, sitting down across from me. "Yeah?" "You doing okay?" I looked up at her. "Are any of us okay? We just learned that we're being monitored by something we can't understand or defend against, and our job is to watch it happen and write it down in a notebook." "I know." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. It was a simple gesture, but it grounded me, reminded me that whatever was happening up in the sky, down here, I wasn't alone. The two guys in medical. Martinez said he felt a presence when he saw the objects, like something was looking at him, studying him. What if they're not unconscious? What if they're somewhere else, experiencing something we can't perceive? She shuddered. That's somehow worse than them just being unconscious. Maybe. Or maybe it's not worse. Maybe they're learning something, experiencing something that we can't imagine. Maybe when they wake up, if they wake up, they'll understand things we don't.
3 days after Holloway's briefing, one of the unconscious men woke up. His name was Davis, and he'd been out for nearly 3 weeks. The news spread through the facility like wildfire, and for the first time since the close encounter, there was something resembling hope in people's voices. They wouldn't let anyone see him at first. He was in isolation in the medical bay, undergoing evaluation. But rumors circulated. Some said he was speaking in languages he'd never learned. Others claimed he couldn't remember anything about the incident, and still others whispered that he'd woken up different somehow, changed in ways that were hard to define. Sarah and I were in the control room when Captain Morrison made the announcement over the facility intercom. "All personnel, this is Captain Morrison. Airman Davis has regained consciousness and is in stable condition. He's undergoing medical evaluation, but is expected to make a full recovery. That is all." The relief in the control room was palpable. Chen actually smiled, which I'd rarely seen him do. Even the usually stoic Morrison looked like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But my relief was short-lived. That night, during our shift, something happened that Davis had apparently warned them about. It was 02:30 a.m. when the contacts began appearing. Not one or two, but dozens of them, all at once, materializing across every sector we monitored.
Within minutes, we were tracking over 60 objects. "This is it," Chen whispered, his voice tight. "This is what Davis told them about." "What do you mean?" I asked, logging contacts as fast as I could write. "Davis woke up talking about a night when they'd all come, when they'd make their presence impossible to deny. He said it would happen soon." The objects weren't just appearing randomly. They were organizing into a formation so vast it spanned our entire monitoring range, hundreds of miles of airspace. They arranged themselves into a massive grid pattern, perfectly spaced, each object exactly 5 miles from its neighbors. Morrison was on multiple radio channels simultaneously, coordinating with other stations. "Confirm, Station West is reporting the same pattern. Station East confirms. All 7 facilities are tracking coordinated mass contact event." All 7 facilities. That meant this wasn't just happening here. This was coordinated across an area of thousands of square miles. Whatever this was, it was big, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "They're descending," Chen reported. "All contacts, simultaneous descent. Current altitude 60,000 feet and dropping." I watched the radar screen, mesmerized and terrified. 60 objects on our screen alone, all moving in perfect synchronization, all descending at exactly the same rate. The precision was inhuman, which I suppose was exactly the point. 50,000 feet, 40,000, 30,000. "Sir, they're coming down, all of them. We need guidance." Holloway's voice came through, and for the first time since I'd met him, he sounded genuinely frightened. "All stations, maintain observation. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt any interaction. We're in contact with command. Just keep tracking." 20,000 feet, 15,000 feet. Then something happened that I'll never forget. Every object stopped simultaneously at exactly 10,000 feet and began to pulse. Not on radar, but actually pulse. The radar signatures grew brighter and dimmer in a coordinated rhythm, like a heartbeat. 1 pulse per second, all perfectly synchronized. "Are you seeing this?" someone called from across the room. "Everyone's seeing it," Morrison replied. "Every facility is reporting the same thing." The pulsing continued for exactly 60 seconds. I counted every one. Then the objects began to move again, but not randomly. They started forming something. The grid pattern broke apart, and the objects regrouped, arranging themselves into symbols. Geometric shapes that spanned miles of airspace, visible only on radar, but unmistakably deliberate. "They're communicating," I said, not really meaning to speak out loud. "But what saying?" Chen asked. We watched as the shapes shifted and changed. A triangle, a circle, a square. Basic geometric forms, repeating in sequence, like they were trying to establish a common language, starting with the most fundamental concepts. Morrison was reporting everything to Holloway, her voice getting higher with each transmission. "Sir, they're forming geometric patterns. It appears to be an attempt at communication. What are our instructions?" There was a long pause before Holloway responded. "Stand by. Command is... They're arguing about what to do. Just stand by." The objects continued their pattern for another 5 minutes. Then suddenly, all at once, they moved. Not away, but closer. They descended another 5,000 feet, putting them at 5,000 feet altitude, low enough that people on the ground could potentially see them, even at night. The radio crackled with Martinez's voice from the ground observation post. "Captain, we have visual. Multiple lights in the sky, arranged in patterns. They're visible to the naked eye. This is... Captain, anyone within 100 miles can see this." And that's when I understood. This wasn't just about communication with us at the facility. This was about being seen,
about making their presence undeniable. How many small towns were scattered around this region? How many hunters, trappers, isolated homesteaders were looking up at the sky right now and seeing something that would change their understanding of reality forever? Sir, they've made themselves visible to civilian populations. This is beyond our containment protocols. Holloway's response was defeated. I know, Command knows. There's nothing we can do about it now. Just keep recording everything. The objects maintained their position for 10 more minutes, their geometric patterns clearly visible on our screens. Then, as if satisfied that they'd made their point, they began to ascend. Slowly at first, then faster, climbing back through the altitudes they'd descended from. But they didn't disappear. Instead of vanishing as they usually did, they climbed to 200,000 feet, higher than we'd ever tracked them before, and stopped. All 60 objects in our sector, and presumably hundreds more across the other sectors, formed one final pattern.
It was a circle. A perfect, massive circle that must have been 500 miles in diameter, encompassing all 7 monitoring facilities. They held that formation for exactly 5 minutes, as if giving everyone time to see it, to understand that this was coordinated and deliberate. Then they vanished. All of them, in the same instant, leaving our screens empty except for normal air traffic. The control room was dead silent. Nobody knew what to say, how to process what we'd just witnessed. This wasn't observation anymore. This was contact, real, undeniable contact. Morrison's radio crackled to life. It was Holloway, and his voice was hollow. All stations, Command has issued Code Black. Total information lockdown. No external communications, no personal calls, no data transmission outside secure military channels. As of this moment, we are in full containment mode. Code Black. I'd heard about it during our initial briefing, but never thought I'd actually experience it. It meant the situation had escalated beyond normal protocols, that something had happened that threatened the entire secrecy apparatus. Also, be advised that preliminary reports are coming in from civilian sources. Multiple 911 calls from towns in the region reporting strange lights in the sky. Local news stations are starting to pick up the story. Command is working on the official explanation, but... He paused, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. This might be the one we can't explain away. Sarah found me after the shift ended. We didn't go to the library this time. Instead, we walked to one of the few windows that looked out over the Alaskan wilderness. The sun was starting to rise, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. It looked so peaceful, so normal, completely at odds with what we'd just experienced. It's going to change everything, isn't it? She said quietly. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe they'll find a way to explain it away, make people doubt what they saw, bury it under a mountain of official denials and disinformation. Those people who saw it, the civilians, they're going to tell their stories, and eventually enough stories pile up that people have to start believing. I thought about that, about all the stories that must have accumulated over the decades. How many people had seen something and been dismissed as crazy? How many had stayed silent because they knew no one would believe them. Davis knew this was coming. Whatever happened to him during those 3 weeks he was unconscious, he came back with knowledge. They showed him something. 2 days after the mass contact event, they let us speak with Davis. Not all of us, just a select few. And I was chosen because Morrison had noted in her reports that I was psychologically stable and intellectually curious. Sarah was selected too, for similar reasons. We were escorted to the medical bay by Holloway himself, which told me this was significant. Davis was sitting up in bed when we entered, looking thin and pale but alert. His eyes were different somehow, more intense, like he was seeing more than what was physically in front of him. He smiled when he saw us, a sad, knowing smile. "You were there," he said. It wasn't a question. "You saw them come down. You saw the patterns." "We did," I confirmed, sitting in the chair next to his bed. Sarah stood beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder. "We were told you knew it was going to happen." Davis nodded slowly. "When I was wherever I was, I experienced things I can't fully describe. Not because I'm not allowed to, but because human language doesn't have words for it. Imagine trying to explain color to someone who's been blind from birth. That's what this is like." "Try," Holloway said, from his position by the door. "We need to understand." Davis closed his eyes, gathering his thoughts. "I was conscious the whole time. I know it looked like I was in a coma, but I was aware. I just wasn't here. I was somewhere else, somewhere that exists outside of normal space and time. And they were there. Not physical beings, at least not in the way we understand physical, but intelligences. Vast, ancient, patient intelligences." "What did they want?" Sarah asked softly. "To show me, to help me understand. They've been watching us for a very long time, not just decades, but centuries, maybe longer. They've watched us grow, evolve, invent technology. They've watched us discover fire, invent the wheel, split the atom, reach for the stars. And they've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked. "For us to be ready. For us to reach a point in our development where we could handle the knowledge that we're not alone, that we're part of something much, much bigger than we ever imagined." Davis opened his eyes, looking directly at me. "That night when they all came down, when they made themselves visible, that was a test. They wanted to see how we'd react, both officially and as individuals. How our governments would respond, how ordinary people would process it." Holloway shifted uncomfortably. "And how did we do?" Davis smiled that sad smile again. "Mixed results. Some people saw wonder. Some saw threat. Some saw opportunity. Pretty much what they expected. But the important thing is, the secret is out now. Not officially, not yet, but it's out there. Enough people saw something that night that it can't be completely suppressed. The truth is starting to seep through the cracks in the official narrative. Command is working on an explanation. Atmospheric phenomena, weather balloons, mass hallucination caused by unusual light refraction. It won't work," Davis interrupted gently. "Not this time. Too many people, too many independent observations, too much coordination in what they saw. You can explain away one sighting, maybe two, But hundreds of people across hundreds of miles, all seeing the same thing at the same time, that's harder to dismiss. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. Davis looked at each of us in turn. "Now we wait. We keep doing our jobs, keep recording, keep observing, because they're not done with us. That display was just the beginning, a way of announcing themselves, of saying, 'We're here, we're real, and we're not going away.' There will be more contact, more visible events, until the truth becomes impossible to deny. It might take years or decades, but it's inevitable now. They've decided it's time." "Time for what?" I pressed. "For humanity to grow up, to stop being alone in the universe and start being part of the larger community of intelligent life. To stop fighting each other over resources and territory and ideology and start thinking about our place in something bigger." He leaned back against his pillows, exhausted from talking. Or at least, that's my interpretation. They don't communicate in words, you understand. They communicate in feelings, in concepts, in experiences that your brain has to translate into something it can process. We sat in silence for a moment, absorbing his words. Then Holloway cleared his throat. "The other man, Kowalski, he's still unconscious. Will he wake up?" "He will," Davis said with certainty. "He's having a different experience than I did, learning different things. When he's ready, when he's seen what they want him to see, he'll come back." "How do you know?"
Because they're not cruel, they're not hostile, they're just different, operating on a time scale and with motivations that are hard for us to comprehend. But they don't want to hurt us. If they did, they would have done it already. They've had plenty of opportunities. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy at Station North. The objects continued to appear nightly, but they stayed high, maintaining their usual patterns. It was like that one massive display had been enough, and now they were back to quiet observation. But the world outside had changed. Reports of the sightings had spread despite the official explanations. The story was picked up by newspapers, then magazines, then national television. There were congressional hearings, though nothing was officially confirmed. Witnesses were interviewed, their stories told and retold. The government maintained its denials, but each denial seemed weaker than the last. Mary and I continued our friendship, which slowly evolved into something more. In a place as isolated and strange as Station North, you either connected with people or you went crazy. We chose connection. We'd sit in the library during our off hours, talking about everything and nothing, finding comfort in shared experience. 3 months after the mass contact event, Kowalski woke up. Like Davis, he came back changed, speaking of experiences beyond words, of intelligence vast and patient. He confirmed what Davis had told us, that this was just the beginning, that more contact was coming, and that the truth would eventually emerge, no matter how hard anyone tried to suppress it. My tour at Station North was supposed to last 2 years, but after 18 months, I was offered an early transfer. They said I'd done exceptional work, maintained perfect security protocols, and had proven myself valuable to the program. They wanted to move me to one of the other facilities to spread my experience around. I turned it down. Sarah and I had gotten engaged by then. A quiet, private thing, just the two of us and a chaplain who visited the facility monthly.
We'd decided that whatever happened, wherever this strange journey took us, we'd face it together. We both requested extensions to our tours at Station North. It had become home in a weird way, this isolated place where impossible things happened nightly. On my final night before our extensions officially began, I stood at my radar station, watching the familiar patterns play out on the screen. 3 contacts in Sector 7, moving in their mysterious ways, following purposes I might never fully understand. Chen sat beside me, quietly logging the observations, and somewhere across the facility, Sarah was monitoring communications, listening to the radio silence of the night sky. I thought about my mother, about her asking me to pray. I'd started doing that, not in any formal way, but in quiet moments, sending thoughts out into the universe. Not prayers for protection or understanding, but prayers of gratitude. Gratitude for being part of this, for bearing witness to something extraordinary, for being trusted with a secret that was slowly becoming not so secret.
Because Davis had been right. The truth was seeping out, spreading through 1,000 cracks in the official narrative. More sightings were being reported, more witnesses were coming forward, more evidence was accumulating. The dam was breaking, slowly but inevitably. And when it finally broke completely, when the truth came flooding out and humanity had to confront the reality that we weren't alone, that we'd never been alone, that we were part of something vast and ancient and incomprehensible, when that day came, there would be people ready to help others understand. People who had spent years watching and recording and processing the impossible. People like us. The objects on my screen began to form a triangle, a pattern I'd seen hundreds of times before. But this time, I noticed something new, a slight variation in the formation, a subtle asymmetry that hadn't been there before. Were they evolving their patterns, adapting their communication, or was I just seeing things that weren't there, imposing meaning on random movements? I didn't know, but I wrote it down anyway, carefully noting the time, the positions, the angles, because that was my job. That was all of our jobs, to watch, to record, to remember. Years from now, when the full truth finally emerged, when historians looked back at this pivotal moment in human history, they'd have our records. They'd know that we'd been watching, that we'd known, that we'd kept faith with our duty, even when that duty required us to keep secrets from the people we loved. The shift ended at 0600 hours. Chen and I completed our logs, secured our station, and walked out into the Alaskan morning. The sun was rising, painting impossible colors across the sky. Violets and golds and shades of blue that seemed almost alien themselves. Sarah was waiting for me in the corridor, tired but smiling. We walked back to our quarters together, hand in hand, 2 people bound together by shared knowledge of the impossible. "Quiet night?" she asked. "Relatively," I said. 3 contacts, standard patterns. "You?" "Same. Some chatter on the civilian frequencies, a few reports of lights in the sky, but nothing like before. The usual." The usual. That's what we'd become. People for whom the impossible had become routine, for whom the extraordinary had become ordinary. But underneath that facade of normalcy, we both knew the truth. Nothing would ever really be usual again. The universe had revealed itself to be stranger, more wonderful, and more terrifying than we ever imagined. And somewhere up there, beyond our radar's reach, beyond our understanding, they were watching, waiting, patient as only the ancient and intelligent can be patient, waiting for us to be ready for whatever came next.